Now, for our guest speaker segment, I'd like to welcome Brian Kozumplik to the stage here as we will begin our interview portion. Just a quick background on Brian. He's a next year automotive um, employee, a manager of functional safety. He's also a senior consultant for Reliatrain Inc. And then, as I'd mentioned previously, two lucky individuals who joined us for the live session today will be getting these two copies of Brian's Edge Research reports. And then I do want to share out the action button here at the bottom. Feel free to go check those out on our Mobilus platform. Now, Brian, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. We look forward to having this great discussion, sort of like the discussion you gave at our this year's WCX event.
Correct. Yeah, that was in April. That was a lot of fun, very exciting. And appreciate Monica Nagarega. She had all the guest speakers lined up, and they worked out really good. So
awesome. So yeah, I guess we should dive right in to our discussion here. I know we have a lot to cover. So I guess the best place to start is where do you see us today here in the U.S. in terms of charging infrastructure?
Sure. Why don't you go to that one slide that shows the there you go. Electrify America, DC fast charge and level 2 charger units. We're starting to see those pop up across the landscapes in some of our mostly urban locations, and I'll talk about that. Most of you have known that there's a bipartisan infrastructure bill that went into place last year. They call it the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And we're talking billions and billions of dollars. $7.5 billion were allocated for EV charging. 10 billion were allocated for transportation in general, clean transportation, and 7 billion for EV battery components like critical materials, minerals, etc. That's a lot of potatoes, as they call it in the industry. And so that money is starting to be spent and starting to be allocated to different parts of the country. So there's a group called NEVI, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. And NEVI has been allocated $5 billion to focus on setting up a network for reliable charging across the US. And so everybody knows Elon Musk, the name Elon Musk is synonymous with electric vehicles, but some of the other major automotive leaders have taken the stage too in some discussions and interviews. Like Charged EV has done an interview with Ford CEO Jim Farley recently. I think it was last month, and they interviewed Jim Farley, and basically what he said, and I quote, is what we've learned about EVs is that it's not about the propulsion system, it's about what we do outside of the propulsion system and also the software. So really what Farley was hinting at was the infrastructure. It's got to be in place. So, and they asked him, they actually pinned EV infrastructure is like a baseball game. It's slow, it's methodical, it's usually 9 innings. And they asked him, where do you think we're at time-wise? He says, we're really in the second inning of a 9-inning game. So we're at the forefront of it. It's very exciting. A lot of periodicals have picked up interest in this subject, EV charging, especially public charging reliability. And Shane, as you mentioned, the two Edge reports, that were written. Of course, you're going to give 2 of those away. It seems like since those were published, it was like Q4 of last year and early this year, there's been a lot of interest, a lot of uptick in this whole subject. So go ahead with your next question.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I didn't know that we were only in the second out of 9. That was a great way to put it in analogy terms. Now, as far as the grid works with, U.S. utilities, obviously it's going to be a lot of infrastructure work, a lot of electricity need to be used. Now, how does that look? Can you give us a kind of a background view on what you're seeing in terms of U.S. utilities and the grid?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you go to that one picture that shows the whole north? We'll go back to that. There you go. We'll start with Michigan. Okay. So basically, and I'll get into the Michigan story in a few minutes because that's where I live and some of you live here and where we had the SAE conference. The Department of Energy estimates that there's about 4.2 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity generated last year in 2022 calendar year, 4.2 trillion kilowatt hours. So if every passenger vehicle in the US today magically converted to an electric vehicle, we would need about a 22% increase in total electricity generation. That's a huge amount of increase. But that's not going to happen. Not even the quote Green Party expects it. We have 276 million vehicles presently in the U.S. Not even the Green Party expects those to turn into EVs magically. So I wanted to get this point right, because Consumer Reports recently did an analysis that even if EVs made up 100% of new car sales by 2035, which is what some of the mandates have put in place, it would take until the year 2060 for almost all these vehicles on the road to be electrified. Because there's ownership and there's longevity of a lot of our ICE powered vehicles. Some of them are on the road for 20 years, 25 years. So for that whole turnover to happen, that's going to be way out in the 2060 timeframe. So Shane, I don't know about you. You'll be around then. Probably not me, but it's a long ways away.
Hey.
So let's talk about how that affects what you're seeing on the page here for energy infrastructure. That translates to about a 1% increase in electrical energy generation per year, which is still well below the average. The average growth rate for electrical generation is about 3.2%. And that's been the rate since they've done this study for about 7 years. So we need about a 1% increase in electrical energy generation, to have this progression to EVs, which we got to have. We've got to get there. And so, all right, let's go to your next question.
You see, you had mentioned the turnover from the normal combustion car that we all kind of have and grown up with. Now, one of the topics that I feel a lot of people are concerned about is how can we trust that we'll be able to find close charging stations, and what does that look like for you going forward?
Yeah. Well, that's why I want to show this. We're showing it now, this Michigan map here. And what they have is what they've designated as alternate fuel corridors. And the state of Michigan's been pretty aggressive compared to some Midwest states. Have been pretty aggressive compared to Indiana and Ohio and some other states around us on setting aside what's called alternate fuel corridors. And so their goal is to have a DC fast charger level 2 public station. And notice I said public, so anybody could pull up to it and use it within 75 miles. And so they're trying to spot that out on some of those major thoroughfares that you see, I-75 and US 10 and US 131. And that one on the left side of the mitten there, that's US 131 that goes from Benton Harbor up to Grand Rapids to Cadillac, then on up to Traverse City. That's an AFC, an alternate fuel corridor. So that you can find public charging stations every 75 miles. Now, there's a whole other issue, and that's primarily the reason I wrote the reports with the background I had in reliability and in talking to Monica and others. This was a huge problem. Basically, one of the periodicals, Charged EV, which is out there in digital space, they ran an article on public charging last month. And I quote, they called it a scandal and embarrassment, because there's roughly a 25% chance that any public charging station you go to, except for Tesla superchargers, won't work when you locate one on your phone. And I went up here before when Sarah was talking and just called up. I'm heading to Grand Rapids this afternoon and called up charging stations. And yeah, there's plenty of them, but hardly any of them are DC fast chargers, which can charge your vehicle in 45 minutes or less. Most of them are level 2 chargers. So there you're talking about a 4-hour wait, so you've got to have something to do for 4 hours while your vehicle's charging at a level 2 charger. So that is an issue. We need DC fast chargers.
Yeah, I could see
DC fast chargers
right.
are what's needed. So if you flip back to that picture of the charging plug, yeah, there you go. So the J1772, the J plug, as you can see on the left, that's pretty standard. It's been around for ages. That's used for a level 2 charger and an old-fashioned level 1, I call them, the one that's in the trunk of your Nissan Leaf or Prius or a Chevy Bolt. And those usually you plug in overnight when you're in for the night, and 12 hours later you get 75% state of charge. But the one on the right, that's your adapter that just came out. And I wanted to mention, this was announced in the Charged EV periodical that Ford and GM has partnered with Tesla, so we can use their charging superchargers with this adapter. And I showed the price because everybody's out there selling them on Amazon and other places. Those 2 ports on the bottom that you see, those are the DC ports for DC fast charge. So that's really what we need to go after, is getting public DC fast chargers that work out there in the public space. So, okay, next question.
Yeah. So with your research and interviews to develop these 2 edge research reports you had recently released, What were some of the concerns that were most prevalent among the SMEs out
Sure.
there?
And the SMEs we're talking about, we're talking about some pretty key SMEs. I wanted to kind of give them a plug. Camille Terry at Charger Help, Q Johnson at Plugs In Detroit. You've got Professor David Rempel, who led a team of about 8 other researchers out of University of California, Berkeley. He provided the Pareto chart. I think it's down later. You can flip that up. That showed the top issues. There we go. Yeah, so this is kind of a quick Excel summary of the top issues where they looked at over 650 DC fast charge units in the Bay Area, and that's primarily where the bulk of a lot of public charging is. And the bottom line is that's where the 25% came up. But it's actually 23% were not working in that area. The biggest problem they seen was payment system failures. With public charging, there's so many players in that ecosphere. You got to have payment first because you're not going to get free electricity unless you pull up to your workplace and they offer a charger. And then charge initiation failure came right after that as the second most highest issue. After you pay for it, you got to initiate the charge. So like on that J1772, you got 2 proximity pins, you got a ground pin and 2 AC pins. Those all got to communicate to the charger and to the back office, to the payment system to say all systems go, we're going to initiate charging. And then the third one was really puzzled was a design failure, and that's where the cord wasn't long enough. And they're pretty standardized at J1772. It's supposed to be 25 feet of cord, but different OEMs put their charge port, inlet port in different parts of the vehicle. Rivian's different than a Tesla, then different than a Chevy Bolt. And some of these vehicles are pretty big too, so there may not be enough space to even pull up and use that charger from the next system over to plug it into where your vehicle is. So that ranked number 3. I was really surprised. The number 4 was error messaging, and you can read on the chart, non-responsive system, network communication. So there's a host of issues there that came up with this study. Now, I did hear from Professor Rempel. I did communicate with him back around the time we did the WCX conference and told him I was presenting, and we talked about some of the things I was going to talk about. He said that they're on another study where they're going to publish very soon. And I know that he's working with Frank Menchaca at SAE for the SMS, Sustainable Mobility Solutions, if I get that right. And they're publishing a charging reporting data that's already been published. So they're looking at round 2 of Professor Rempel's study out of UC Cal Berkeley. And that will hopefully show an improvement, and we'll not see 23% not functioning. Hopefully it'll be much lower. Just for talking points, the Tesla chargers are around 4% not functioning. And that includes availability and reliability. They're somewhat little different topics. Availability is like, it could be a reliable charger, but it's not available if the payment system doesn't work. Whereas reliability more focuses on the core content of the internal circuits inside of it, the actual physical parts of it, do they work or not, and the electronics. That's where reliability focuses on that end of it. So. Okay, next question.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, are we going too fast or too slow in terms of EV adoption?
That's a good question, and I get that a lot when I'm talking to other people in different settings about this topic. In my mind, and based on some research and also attending some of the WCX conferences, and there's people talking about this there, not just myself, I think we're going at the right pace in this study. We've got to make sure that this EV charging ecosphere is totally aligned and on board and pulling in the same direction. And like I mentioned before, some of the Midwest states are slow to get traction because they're kind of waiting for the local governments, like the township I live in. I haven't seen one EV charger pop up yet, even though I've called them and said, okay, guys, what about the infrastructure? My taxes keep going up. So what about the infrastructure? And so I think a lot of townships and municipalities are kind of waiting. They're waiting to get these government grants that are available, but a lot of them are allotted to the utility companies like DTE and Consumers Energy. So they're starting to get on board because they're seeing what's happening, of course, in California, Oregon, Washington, and even Virginia. And of course, some of the Northeast corridor states are really getting on board, Delaware, New Jersey, New York. So it seems to be the outer fringes of the country. And then, interior has got to get on board too. But I think we're going at the right rate. Yeah, there you go. It's a good picture if you see where the population density is. Thanks for showing that. I do want to bring up the inclusivity topic because it's important. And I talked about that in the second report I wrote. And there's the government has termed what they call LMI, low to medium income neighborhoods. And we've really got to have equity with charging because not everybody can have a 3 or 4 bedroom house on a cul-de-sac with a, aero environment level 2 charger inside their garage where it's nice and safe, where they can plug in their vehicle outside the garage or inside at night. And within 4 hours, they're up to 80% state of charge. Not everybody can do that. A lot of people, they live in apartments, they live in public housing. They need public chargers, and public chargers need to work for those people, and they need to be safe, and they need to work like I've mentioned. So I know Charger Help in Los Angeles is working towards that effort. Camille Terry, who's been working with some of the other folks at SAE, has been really involved with this. She's been on some committees with our current government. I know some other charger companies like Plug Zen in Detroit. He was at our WCX talk. Q Johnson, he's working on that effort too. So we've really got to have equity in the forefront here because for people to adopt EVs, they've got to go to a public charger, and it's got to be just as common as your local gas station, your local Citgo or Speedway or wherever you get your fuel in your ICE powered vehicle. We've got to have those public chargers available, and they've got to work and be reliable at those kind of frequency of locations. So that's really the key. Is to get back to your question, Shane. We've got to have the infrastructure in place, and so we've really got to take advantage of this
Mhm.
money that's been allocated, make sure it's not wasted and used properly. So, reading through what SAE's done, I know I keep giving a plug on that, but the sustainable mobility solutions, the electric vehicle charging data, you guys should go on their website and get a copy of that and read it. There's a lot of good material in there, a lot of good contributors that Frank and his team has put together on that, and it raises some of these same questions and some of the same issues. So we're moving in the right direction. That's the good thing. It's positive. Okay, next question.
Awesome. Yeah, not being an industry expert, obviously, the inclusivity thing is one of those things that I feel like a lot of people might not even think about. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and kind of as a good segue into the next question that I had for you is where the U.S. stands. How are we faring compared to other countries, and why we be exceeding or falling behind?
Sure. I think, like I said, this bipartisan infrastructure law is really going to give a steroid shot in the arm to our infrastructure, and I see that happening. But countries like China, when you do the research, they've put an EV policy in place for about the last 15 years. In my current role, and next year, we provide a lot of steering systems to a lot of OEMs in China, and one of the biggest OEMs they have is BYD, and that's the name of the company, BYD, and it stands for Build Your Dreams. And they have produced 900,000, almost a million EVs last year in 2022. That's more than Tesla, but you don't seem to hear about that in the press. Tesla, you hear about all the time, maybe because of Elon Musk. He seems to be in a lot of different areas and he gets a lot of airtime on the ads and stuff. But BYD is built almost a million EVs last year. And in Europe, when you look at Charin, which is an organization that is involved with charging infrastructure, mostly in Europe, they're really big on pushing EVs in Germany and Poland and France. And you'll see a lot more adoption of EVs. And DC fast charge stations are more commonplace in those bigger cities like Paris and Stuttgart and Munich, Tiki, Poland, Rüsselsheim, and other places that are in Europe. So they're getting a lot of support from Charin, which is mostly European based. Even though there's some members of Charin, there's over 300 members in the United States, most of their members are in Europe. So the US is behind. And I think the Biden administration realizes that, and that's why they're allocating funds. Good question. Yeah. Okay.
I was gonna bring up the next topic, the hybrid electric vehicles. Would you say they're just as good as the solution, or what's your
That's
opinion
a
on
very interesting topic.
that?
Yeah.
The hybrid electric
That's
vehicles?
why I'm glad. I know SAE is published Kelly Senecal's book and Felix's book on racing towards zero. I'm flashing this up, just part of it, but yeah, you got it there. That's an interesting read. And Kelly is an interesting speaker. He was at WCX in one of the kickoff speeches and really enjoyed kind of reading through his material and listening to his presentation. So hybrid electric vehicles, which I worked on for about 10 years at GM, and I worked on EVs like the Chevy Bolt, and then the Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid. They've got a place in this structure, and they've got to have a place as we make the transition to full EVs. But if you read Kelly's book, he throws a lot of caution out there about that because you got to look at point source pollution, and we control that with EVs, obviously, because you're producing electricity in a power plant, which you don't see in your backyard. It may be on the Jersey Shore, just like that picture there. That's a good one. But there's some power plant producing the electricity, and about 22% of them to 25% are coal-fired power plants. And so you got to have emission control devices on those plants to control the emissions too. So batteries, mostly lithium-ion batteries. The average lithium mine takes about 10 years to get started. And yeah, we know China's got a lot of lithium, but so do we in the United States and other parts of the world in South America. The lithium is there. They say we have enough lithium for many generations to come. It's just getting it out of the earth that's the problem. So that's an issue too, because producing batteries produces emissions too and pollution. So getting back to your answer, your question, so I can answer it succinctly, because I know I'm watching the clock too. We really got to have a balance. We got to use hybrid vehicles as a transition and use micro hybrids too. I think in Kelly's book, he actually said every vehicle should have some type of battery to have the accessory drives, work when you're at a stoplight. And if you guys know about stoplights, they're a curse. We hate them, but you got to stop, and let traffic proceed. A minute you're waiting there, that engine should be off. So most of our newer vehicles have, some type of small 40-volt system where the engine shuts off, the gasoline-powered engine shuts off when you're at a stoplight. So that's the transition we need then to full EVs. Okay.
Yeah. Would you say the cost benefit between pure EV, hybrid EV, and your internal combustion engines would you say they all have a place in the market today? And what would you say the cost benefit would be between the three?
Yes, it depends on your driving cycle, and that's kind of what Kelly talked about in his book, Kelly and Felix. It all depends, because if you're a person like me, where I'm on the freeway to my job, and it's a 45-minute drive, and I got maybe two stoplights, I'm in high speed mode, freeway speed, 70 miles an hour for 95% of that trip, and so I only see like two stoplights. So if that's my normal job, normal commute, then the battery electric vehicle doesn't really suit my needs though. But if I'm a start-stop driver and I'm driving in the city and I'm going, an average of 15 miles to my workplace and back and going through various stoplights, then the EV is a perfect solution, or a hybrid is a great solution for that. Because the hybrid gives you that backup, that extra power that you needed. I know GM had made a two-mode hybrid for about 7 years, and that was a wonderful engine, but it did shut off at stoplights, and it went for about 25 miles per hour. Then the engine kicked in, the ICE engine kicked in when you were pulling a trailer and needed it. So you got to have a balance. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I can see that. Now, one of the last questions I was going to have for you was how about having enough batteries for all electric vehicles? Are we expecting that to be plausible within the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I'd done some research after I wrote the reports about lithium, and I had mentioned earlier that it takes an average of about 10 years to get a lithium mine up and running. And when you look at the pure amount of lithium that's needed, from my research, it says we do have enough lithium out there, because also what they're doing is they've got recycling programs put in this bipartisan infrastructure law. There's recycling programs for lithium-ion batteries. Priuses have been out there for about 15 years. And so the average life of a lithium-ion battery is about 7 to 8 years. So sometimes those early Priuses, they've been recycled, their batteries, 2 or 3 times already. So there are efforts in place to recycle the batteries. I know Elon Musk and the whole Tesla front, I've read some material there where they're recycling some of the Tesla batteries, and GM is doing that too. They've got total life cycle plans in place for that. So that's part of the equation too. We've got to recycle some of the older lithium batteries coming out of circulation, but there is enough lithium, they say. To make a plug socially here too, from some of the research, it's disheartening to know that some of those lithium mines employ a lot of different people and at low income wage scale working in those mines. So we've got to have equity there too. We've got to have a true balance. When you're driving that $80,000 electric vehicle, thinking that you're saving the planet, you are in a way, but look what's happening on the back end. Look at what's happening the producer end of that EV too. So Kelly brings
Mhm.
out some of those points in his book too. Just keep a social mindset in that respect.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now, in your opinion, where do you see us heading from here? What's the path ahead look like for us?
What I think the path ahead is, and I think it's going to take some personal engagement, is, be an adopter, try out an EV. I mean, you may not want to buy one, but you can rent them places. You can rent them at the Enterprise or whatever. Try them out, get a feel for them because they're a rush. They're fun to drive. I've driven EVs for about 15 years now, and they're just a rush. The propulsion and the instant torque that you get in an EV is just amazing. And a lot of people, that's what they like. They like to be able to have that quiet acceleration and that just you've all had people pull up to your driveway and they leave their car running. They're talking to you. It's like, my goodness, you just smell this exhaust. Or in the morning when you start up, even on a newer vehicle, it takes a while for that catalytic converter to heat up and for it to treat the O2 sensors to kick in and to treat that exhaust. So um, it's pure and it's clean and it's fun. But the path is, I think we all got to get engaged. I think we all got to work with our local municipalities. Like I'm trying to work with our township here to say, where's our level 2 chargers? Where's our DC fast chargers? You guys have got an allocation of funds from the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. The billions and billions of dollars that are out there. And I'm glad Michigan, for instance, our state here has got some of those efforts in place, and they've got a pretty exhaustive document on that. But wherever you live and who's ever listening to this across industry, you got to take it personally. You got to get involved with your local municipalities and governments and ask for those charging stations, ask for that adoption. So that's my take on it.
Awesome. So yeah, that concludes the questions I had for you. Do you have any closing statements you want to make to the audience before you take off and enjoy the rest of your
Thank you.
vacation?
Yes. Stay tuned because I'm working with Dr. Rempel out of, like I said, University Cal Berkeley. He is going to publish a second report, and I know that it's really glad to see SAE's SMS, Sustainable Mobility Solutions, involved in this. And Frank's got a team of people working behind the scenes and working on charging reporting. And I read his report and I kind of light bulb went off because I lived through the OBD2 era back in the mid 90s, onboard diagnostics where you got those lights on your vehicle that were demanded by the government to say, you've got a problem with your vehicle. You've got a O2 sensor or some evap canister faulty and it's got to get fixed or else you're going to affect emissions. The same kind of analogy should be used for public charging. There are public chargers are out there. We've got to have some kind of detection, oncology, standard data reporting to make sure they're continuously improving and making those public chargers work. 1 out of 4 is unacceptable. That means if you pull up to a gas pump and 1 out of 4 times it didn't work, you'd have a public outcry. You'd hear about it on the news every night. That's got to be the same way we got to treat public EV charging. So I'll leave you with that thought. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for volunteering your time to come speak with us today. So 2 lucky winners, like I said, are going to get the two edge research reports. I know you'd put this in the slide deck here for today. So I'm assuming if anyone has any questions, they could reach out to you via email.
Sure.
But yeah, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you.